I'm Sarah Burke, and this is the Women in Media Podcast. Doing something a little different today. This is a solo episode. I already just lost half the audience. Shit. No, what's brought me to the mic today, a couple things actually, is first my need to unpack and talk about something that I think many people in many industries are dealing with right now. But also, I was a little shocked last week. I did a little poll on Instagram because I've been thinking about solo episodes more frequently. And I just said, what are you interested in to my followers? Like, do you want more solo episodes where an article or something that happened to me has inspired me to just want to talk about something? Or my regular interview-based show where I have guests on speaking about their experience in the media? I was kind of shocked. 92% of my followers, and I think there were about 200 people that answered the poll, 92% said, yeah, more solo. So I guess a bit of my imposter syndrome is talking here when I say I'm shocked to see that result. But I did do several radio shows for several years, and I guess at some point I developed some sort of skill for talking on a microphone. So I'm going to work with that a little bit because this allows me to bring some topics to the podcast that maybe wouldn't come up with a guest, and also just like riff on stuff going on. So that's my first reason for showing up at the mic today, and to tell you about what's been going on and get us into the other reason I'm here today with this episode. I just got back from Podcast Movement, which is an annual podcast conference. It was in Washington, D.C. this year, or Maryland, to be specific. I learned a lot about the geography down there while I was there. Did some sightseeing, took in some great panels, met a lot of really great new industry people that I want to stay in touch with or work with in the future. And what I love about Podcast Movement is like this conference is for all levels of podcasting and all levels of the creators, where there are sessions that are dedicated to people just starting out. And I have people that are just starting out in podcasting on my network. So it's important that, I keep up with that level of things. But then there's also like, okay, so you have a network. How do you want to monetize your network? How do you want to do business? What are the advertisers looking for? What are some cool new tools that can help your workflow? Like I record on Riverside right now, Riverside FM. And, to be able to have FaceTime with the company whose platform I'm using to record and just say, could really use a little more of this. I could really use a little more of that. By the way, could you take that feature out completely? It's a piece of shit. So that was great. But it's also a place where the industry gathers, and it's special. And just being in year 2 of what I would call the podcast industry proper. Yes, I've had podcasts for many years, but this is like, I've really taken a dive in now to the industry. It's just important to keep up with what's going on, be seen and be heard, but also develop new relationships. So anyway, at Podcast Movement, one night I went up to my room and I was trying to have an early night. I wanted to relax. In full disclosure, I may have had an edible to just unwind a little bit before bed. I wanted to have an early morning. So probably the worst time while unwinding to A, be on my device, and to B, participate in anything AI related on my device that I specifically found on social media. Recipe for disaster for an unwind situation. You know what I mean? So I found myself laughing at a post from a friend of mine. So Jess Knights, she is a fantastic musician. She's working on new music right now. Shout out to Jess. But she was participating in this Instagram trend. You've probably seen it. And it asks ChatGPT to roast your Instagram, like make fun of you. So it made fun of her in a like starving artist kind of way. And I laughed. I really enjoyed what she posted. And then I was like, maybe I want to see what my roast would say. Now, let me give you a little bit of context on my social media identity. I would say that I'm still in a transition. You may have thought, oh, she had a pretty good launch with her network. And I am proud of how the launch went with the network. And I was working with someone actually a client of mine who specializes in, social content in the Instagram grid and just making your brand more aligned with what you do. And while, like, the followers of the count doubled, and that was quite valuable. And, we had lots of spotlight on the launch, and that went really, really well. The truth is, I am still at a complete identity crisis for my social media platforms because I have all these followers who were interested in music content in my previous career in music programming and radio. I'm sure some people follow me for more of, call it my radio persona anyway, which I sort of feel is very similar to what you're getting right now. If I'm doing an ad read, I might turn it on, but for the most part, I feel like I talk the same whether I'm on the radio or not. Sometimes there's a timer is the only difference. So lucky you, no one's telling me to shut up right now. Anyway, so getting back to my point here, I don't really know who I am online. I know that for, a network launch, you're thinking about logos and how you want the branding to look on your website and all of this stuff. But the direction I was being guided in for the launch isn't necessarily true to my identity, right? So I feel kind of at a crossroads where I know I need help with social media, but like it's the bottom of my to-do list right now because I'm focused on content and getting new podcasts launched and bringing in new podcasts to the network, right? Priorities. Socials are important. I'm not discounting their importance. I just know that it hasn't been at the top of my list to be constantly like, I've been off even my personal Instagram stories a lot more than I've been on them. And there was a time where I was on them more, right? So whether we're talking about my network account or my personal account, there's definitely a bit of an avoidance that is happening for me personally there because I don't really know my identity. I know my brand network identity, but I don't know my own personal identity online right now. So as I've been working through that, you know, this is why I was open to the idea of the Instagram roast because I'm also someone who loves constructive feedback and constructive criticism. So it's almost like, okay, what can you tell me that I might not like, but that I could implement is sort of where my mindset was. Well, I'm going to read you what ChatGPT said when I said, please roast my Instagram feed at Burke Talks. It's a chaotic mix of overly filtered selfies, inspirational quotes you probably don't even believe, and a bizarre obsession with documenting every meal you eat. Maybe there's an attempt at being edgy or deep, but it's likely buried under a mountain of generic content that screams, I desperately want to go viral, but have no idea how. Do yourself a favor and post something original or at least something less cringeworthy. That cut deep. I don't know why. Like, fully understanding that this is artificial intelligence writing this based on me providing my Instagram handle and it scrubbing the web. I took this for like complete personal face value. Like, the inspirational quotes. What's so funny about that is like, I like some quotes sometimes. And when an interview, a specific quote comes up that you want to highlight, like, absolutely. But I'm not necessarily like, I'm like a Rick Rubin quote girl more than I would be like I don't know. Do you get what I'm getting at here? Like, that wouldn't be the first thing that I would think of with my Instagram account. Then there's this bizarre obsession with documenting every meal you eat. I don't think I even post a lot of food on my Instagram grid, but I guess in my stories I have, and I've tagged restaurants. So maybe that's where that comes from. I also have no idea how this ChatGPT prompt works. Like, is it finding things from stories or is it just finding things from my grid? I don't know. There's an attempt at being edgy or deep. And this is where I was like, this is my identity crisis where I used to be a rock radio host and now I'm trying to be something else. And it's all I can tell you is that what followed me putting this prompt into ChatGPT was a downward spiral that made no sense. Do yourself a favor and post something original. My authenticity was being attacked And I took this as real. I was offended. I felt personally bullied by ChatGPT. And I sat there for an hour just looking at my feed and being like, oh my God, is it? Am I trying to be edgy? Does that is that an inspirational quote people are laughing at? I cannot even explain to you how this all went too far. Okay? My brain went to an unhealthy place with all of it. So that's one takeaway from this, because as we implement more and more AI tools into what we do, whether podcasting or something else, branding your website, writing copy for something, whatever it is, we have to remember that ChatGPT is functioning within an environment that we've created. And I almost go to Naomi Klein's doppelganger here, because this is kind of an example of your internet doppelganger being what ChatGPT can access in this situation, if that makes sense. So it's accessing the public version of me, not me. But because what I think I'm sharing is authentic or whatever, then is it an attack on me personally when ChatGPT says it's not authentic? I realize that this entire brainwave is not healthy. So eventually, I go back to ChatGPT. I wish I could see timestamps of exactly how long it was. I'm going to say it was about an hour. I wrote, how do I fix it? Come on, AI. How do I fix it? Show up. To elevate your Instagram game, start by curating your content with a clear theme or aesthetic that reflects your true interests and personality. So, just right off the top, the person that I mentioned who was helping me with my Women in Media Network launch, maybe I bought into someone else's aesthetic. And maybe that's why I feel conflicted about what to do on socials. Okay, so that's just one takeaway. Then there's a full list of things here that I actually found so helpful as someone who is, let's use the word, intimidated by social media right now. I feel like I'm comfortable sharing off the cusp, just popping on stories and being like, this is what happened today, or here's me singing Weezer songs very out of key and in the most annoying voice that you could hear when you see this the next morning. I'm still sorry about that. These were takeaways that I could actually apply to what I'm doing online with a bit of a plan, and it actually made me feel better. So, quality over quantity. Focus on posting high quality images and videos that tell a story or offer value. Avoid over posting. Posting every day is like this thing that you're supposed to do. And I get so down on myself when I can't keep the network feed alive because I feel like other people are depending on it. Like, I have network children now. But over posting just for the sake of posting is also not the right answer, right? You have to have something to say, just like a podcast. You don't do a podcast to have nothing to say. Be authentic. Share content that genuinely reflects who you are. People connect more with authenticity than with overly polished impersonal posts. Well, let me tell you, when I have a guest booked, especially someone like I recently had Erica Ayers Badon, okay, the former CEO of Barstool Sports. Of course, I want to put out something that reflects good on the conversation we had, but also who she is. And most of these people, when you interview them, you're getting a headshot and you want it to be the photo that they want you to use, not the one that like you snapped as a screenshot from the video. So there's just so much to think about what actually goes into what gets shared about a podcast episode online. And that's where I go back to me asking my Instagram followers. I made a joke that I was doing my own cheap version of audience um, research. And that's where I'm laughing because it's like the 92% screams, we just want Sarah to talk. It doesn't mean I shouldn't also interview people because, I think the conversations I have with people are special too. But that tells me that more authenticity is perhaps what people are looking for. And like what I'm doing right now, there's no script. I just hit record. As a matter of fact, I am wearing a workout shirt with a collared shirt that I threw on for a meeting that I had before this. I've been in the sun half the day decompressing. This morning, I had a very busy, productive morning, and then I gave myself the afternoon in the sun to get my workout in. And it's just like flying by the seat of my pants. This might end up landing more authentically than an episode with, I don't know, like a news personality or a broadcaster. So let's continue on this list. Consistency. Develop a cohesive visual style, whether through color schemes, filters, or the types of content you post so your feed looks like a unified whole. I can see how I need work on that, and there's not much more to say about that other than acknowledge it, come up with a plan, and do something with it. Engage. Interact with your audience by responding to comments using engaging options and captions and asking questions. This builds community. For a long time now, I think my socials have been operating as output versus engagement. When I go on, I'm going on to post something that I need people to know, and then I'm off, which means I'm not engaging with community at all. So that's like a valid takeaway and something I genuinely want to work on. And I think part of the problem is just running too many Instagram accounts. I have, a few accounts I run for some of the creators on my network because I'm not the only one who has, we'll call it some avoidance with social media. But, when I am being paid to do a task, it's very different than me holding myself accountable. Diversify your content. Mix up your posts with a balance of personal updates, behind the scenes content, and things that inspire you. Well, a solo episode of a podcast is a great parallel here. I need to diversify my podcast as well as my social media because, the same stuff all the time gets boring, whether you're looking at podcast content or a social media feed. What can you do differently within the constraints of what you do and what your offering is? Like for me, this is a bi-weekly podcast. So how can I change up something within the bi-weekly frame for my listeners? And less self-promotion, more value. So, I mean, the line about, doing a lot of self-promotion in that chat GPT prompt kind of like made me feel really icky and nervous. Um, because I feel like I'm posting things that I think people need to know in a professional sense. But then there's that question of when are you overdoing it and just bragging? And I was left in that hotel room thinking about that specifically. And there's a line. There's definitely a line. And I personally hate the idea of just like bragging or even humble bragging. And then I was asking myself, am I doing that? Like, for example, the network was featured in Costco magazine. I don't know if you saw the copy. And I mean, I think the piece was to support, a women's podcasting network and growth in general and working with amazing people. But, was I pumping my own tires too much? This is where my brain went. Okay. I'm just sharing super openly about that. So, on the less self promotion front, it says instead of constantly promoting yourself, offer value to your followers, whether it's tips, insights, or humor. I mean, you could call my vocal uh, musings at a concert something humorous, something funny, an offering for my account followers. I'm so sorry about my Weezer singing. It's terrible. You should never listen to me at my favorite band's concert because it will always sound terrible. I just should leave the singing to Rivers Cuomo. But anyway, I'm not offering anyone podcasting tips on my network page or my Burke Talks page. I mean, I talk about podcasting, but I'm not, for someone who, like me, claims that they want to build community. Well, where's the community in what I'm doing? This is a big, just like realization, I think. And while I felt completely torn and actually sad about what ChatGPT said about my Instagram page in its roast, what came out of it was, in fact, some really helpful tips on how I can think about these things in a different way. Like it says, by focusing on these aspects, you'll create a more engaging, visually appealing, and authentic feed that people will want to follow and interact with. The same literally goes for podcasting. You have to show up as yourself in a really saturated market. Like, how many friggin' podcasts are there? What's the value? What are you offering to people? That's different from podcast A, B, or C. And so this has given me a lot to think about. That's sort of what I wanted to jam on today. But as we start to incorporate, I mean, I'm probably later than most. I feel like many colleagues or just professionals that I know in other industries are already incorporated when it comes to using AI tools. At the end, you need the human brain to finesse it. I've talked about show notes, podcast show notes. You know, there is a feature in my recording software that I'm on right now that says generate show notes, and it uses AI to summarize what you talked about in an episode. Now, if you're recording with Jan Arden and it's an hour and a half to 2 hours of conversation, you know, unless you are very close to the project and editing, like I am, then in order to develop your show notes, you might need a reminder about what was talked about in the session, what topics you covered, the themes that came up. I really don't like using an AI tool like that without, though, running my own human eyes over it at the end and being like, oh, we did talk about that. That sounds robotic. I'm just going to fix this up. So even with this exercise and looking at my social media feed, I'm trying to look at it this way. The robot gave me these generic things, assumptions about my Instagram feed, but that same robot gave me really great ways to improve how I use Instagram. So there is like such a balance here in what we need or how we need to approach using artificial intelligence. So in closing, I would be very interested to know, regardless of your profession, how you are using AI, if at all, if you've been roasted by ChatGPT. I would love to hear about that too. But also what types of topics you might like to hear me talk about if I'm doing more of these solo episodes, which apparently I should be doing more of. And I do hope that, you know, breaking away from a script with interview questions. I mean, I'm not that scripted when I interview people, but I do think about my questions ahead of time. You know, it'd be great to know what you might want to hear a full episode on that I can just handle by just showing up to the mic like I did today. So as this podcast continues to grow, I want to consider community a little bit more. Other network happenings that I'll just mention quickly as I wrap up here. A couple podcasts have joined. I Shake My Head with Lisa and Sam. They are two hilarious women out of Saskatoon who are talking about all of the middle-aged things that women go through, and they are very funny. Bioactive, which is a podcast hosted by Dr. Riley Kirk. She is a research scientist and PhD. She's a professor, and she's looking at like psychedelics and cannabis and like the actual science and chemistry and biology behind plant medicine. Shayla Ulat Stonechild just joined the network with the Matriarch Movement podcast. She is an incredible Indigenous creator. And this week we put out a new episode with Sage Paul, really important conversations around Indigenous fashion, especially in Toronto. And this is huge. Oh my goodness. I'm so excited to welcome Sarah Nicole Landry, the Papaya Podcast, to the network. She's going to have new episodes starting next week for her new season, and I'm so thrilled to have her. We just sold out our first live event for the Jan Arden podcast. So Caitlin, Jan, and I are going to do an in-person live recording, live tape. And I hope to do more of those. We are planning one right now with the Trust Me, I'm a Decorator podcast with Debbie Travis and Tommy Smythe. So I'll be all over socials when tickets to that go on sale. But yeah, just doing a lot of taking risks, seeing what works. And yeah, I'm really enjoying my new life as an entrepreneur. So thank you so much for listening. I obviously did something a little different today, so please let me know what you thought of it. And I can't wait to get up and running with more interviews for the fall. I will keep you posted on all of that. Talk to you soon.